Picture this. You're lying awake at 3 a.m., your mind racing with thoughts about a harsh comment from your boss earlier that day. Or perhaps you're obsessively checking your phone, waiting for a response from someone who matters to you. Maybe you've spent hours analyzing a conversation, wondering if you said the wrong thing. What if I told you that your suffering isn't coming from these situations themselves, but from your psychological attachment to them? The most powerful people throughout history have understood a fundamental truth that most of us are never taught. Emotional freedom doesn't come from controlling your external circumstances. It comes from mastering the art of strategic detachment. This isn't about becoming cold or unfeeling. Quite the opposite. It's about developing the ability to experience life fully while simultaneously maintaining enough psychological distance that you aren't enslaved by your reactions to it. Think about the last time someone's opinion of you completely derailed your day, or how a minor setback snowballed into catastrophic thinking. What if you could experience these exact same external events, but remain centered, clear-headed, and in control of your responses? The ancient Stoics understood this. So did Buddhist practitioners. And now, modern psychology is confirming what these wisdom traditions have taught for centuries. Attachment is the root of suffering, and learning strategic detachment is the path to freedom. But here's the crucial distinction most people miss. Detachment isn't about caring less. It's about suffering less, while actually engaging more effectively with what truly matters. Through this exploration, I'll reveal why your attempts to control your emotions through external validation are fundamentally flawed. I'll show you why trying to feel better by changing other people's behavior or securing certain outcomes is a psychological trap that guarantees continued suffering. Most importantly, I'll share the concrete, practical framework for strategic detachment that has transformed my own life and the lives of thousands of others. A framework you can begin implementing immediately after watching this video. The question isn't whether you're currently attached in unhealthy ways. We all are. The question is, are you ready to learn why these attachments are causing your suffering, and what specific steps you can take to break free from them, starting today? To truly understand strategic detachment, we must first journey to ancient Rome, where a former slave named Epictetus was developing one of history's most powerful philosophical systems for psychological freedom. Epictetus, born into slavery around 50 CE, experienced extreme physical and emotional suffering throughout his early life. Yet somehow, this man, who had virtually no control over his external circumstances, discovered an internal freedom so profound that even Emperor Marcus Aurelius would later study his teachings. The cornerstone of Epictetus's philosophy was a radical distinction that most of us still fail to make today, some 2,000 years later. He observed, "Some things are within our control, while others are not." This seemingly simple statement contains the seed of profound psychological liberation. Epictetus wasn't suggesting we should become passive observers of life. Instead, he was offering a revolutionary framework for determining where to invest our emotional energy. According to Epictetus, the only things truly within our control are our judgments, our decisions to act, and our attitudes toward events. Everything else, other people's opinions, external outcomes, past events, future uncertainties, these lie outside our complete control. Here's where this becomes immediately relevant to your daily suffering. Epictetus argued that unhappiness and anxiety come from mistakenly believing we can control what is inherently uncontrollable. Think about it. When you're lying awake at night, worrying about a work presentation, are you concerned about the parts within your control, your preparation, your delivery, your attitude? Or are you obsessing over the uncontrollable aspects, others' reactions, their pre-existing biases, external factors that might affect the outcome? The Stoic practice of strategic detachment involves a disciplined recognition of this distinction and a deliberate choice to invest emotional energy only in what you can influence. But this isn't just ancient philosophy. Modern psychological research has validated Epictetus's insights through concepts like locus of control, cognitive distortions, and emotional regulation strategies. For instance, Dr. Albert Ellis's rational emotive behavior therapy, REBT, built upon Stoic principles to develop the ABC model: adversity, beliefs, consequences. Ellis demonstrated that it's not external events, adversity, that cause emotional suffering, but rather our beliefs about those events that determine the emotional consequences we experience. Similarly, acceptance and commitment therapy, ACT, one of today's most effective psychological approaches, emphasizes cognitive diffusion, the ability to observe thoughts and emotions without becoming entangled in them, which directly parallels Stoic detachment practices. What makes strategic detachment so powerful and so different from mere indifference is that it allows you to care deeply about outcomes while simultaneously accepting that many aspects remain outside your control. This paradoxical stance creates psychological resilience that's impossible to achieve through either complete attachment or complete disengagement. But here's what neither Epictetus nor modern psychologists fully address. How do you practically implement strategic detachment in a world designed to keep you emotionally attached? How do you apply these principles when your phone is constantly pinging with notifications designed to trigger attachment responses? How do you maintain psychological distance when social media algorithms are specifically engineered to elicit emotional reactions? And most importantly, how do you distinguish between healthy engagement and unhealthy attachment in your relationships, career, and personal goals? These questions reveal why strategic detachment remains so elusive despite its ancient roots. The principles have existed for millennia, but the practical implementation in our hyper-connected, validation-seeking modern context requires a more nuanced approach than either the Stoics or contemporary psychology have fully articulated. The fundamental challenge of strategic detachment lies in a profound paradox: to care deeply about life without becoming emotionally enslaved by it. This balancing act isn't just difficult, it runs counter to many of our most basic psychological tendencies. Let's explore why we become unhealthily attached in the first place. Your brain evolved in an environment where social rejection could mean death. Being excluded from the tribe wasn't just uncomfortable, it was potentially fatal. This explains why rejection, criticism, and disapproval trigger such powerful physiological responses, activating the same neural pathways as physical pain. Additionally, your brain is constantly seeking certainty and control as survival mechanisms. Uncertainty registers as a threat, which is why unresolved situations, like waiting for an important email or wondering if someone is upset with you, create such intense anxiety. These evolutionary adaptations served us well for thousands of years, but in our modern context, they create patterns of attachment that cause immense suffering without providing any survival advantage. Consider 3 common forms of unhealthy attachment. First, attachment to outcomes. When you tie your emotional well-being to specific results, getting the promotion, receiving someone's approval, achieving a particular goal by a certain date, you place your happiness at the mercy of factors you cannot fully control. Second, attachment to identity. When your self-worth becomes fused with particular roles or self-conceptions, being the successful one, the smart one, the one who never fails, any threat to these identities triggers existential distress. Third, attachment to narratives. When you become fixated on how things should be or how others should behave, you create endless conflict between your mental expectations and reality as it actually unfolds. What makes these attachments so insidious is that they often masquerade as virtues. We call outcome attachment ambition, identity attachment integrity, and narrative attachment having standards. But here's the critical distinction. You can pursue goals, embody values, and maintain principles without unhealthy psychological attachment to them. This is where strategic detachment enters as a transformative practice. It involves developing the capacity to observe thoughts and emotions without becoming them, distinguish between what you can and cannot control, care deeply while simultaneously accepting all possible outcomes, invest fully in the process rather than fixating on results. Let me illustrate this with an example that changed my own relationship with attachment. Several years ago, I was working on a major project that represented a significant career opportunity. I had invested months of effort, and the outcome seemed to hinge on a single critical meeting with key decision-makers. As the meeting approached, I noticed myself becoming increasingly anxious. I was checking email constantly, rehearsing conversations in my head, and experiencing physical symptoms of stress. My sleep deteriorated, and I found myself snapping at loved ones. In that state of attachment, I was suffering tremendously while simultaneously diminishing my effectiveness. The attachment wasn't helping me prepare better. It was actively undermining my capabilities. Then, I applied the strategic detachment framework I'm about to share with you. First, I clearly distinguished what was within my control, my preparation, my presentation, my attitude, and what wasn't. Others' pre-existing biases, competing priorities I didn't know about, external factors affecting the decision. Second, I practiced cognitive diffusion, observing my catastrophic thoughts. If this doesn't work out, my career is over, without believing them. I labeled these as thoughts rather than truths. I'm having the thought that my career depends on this meeting. Third, I engaged in outcome acceptance. I systematically visualized different possible outcomes, including the worst-case scenarios, and mentally rehearsed responding to them with equanimity. This wasn't about expecting failure, but rather removing its psychological power over me. Fourth, I redirected my focus to process engagement. Rather than fixating on the desired outcome, I immersed myself in the inherent value of the work itself, finding meaning in the act of creation, regardless of its ultimate reception. The result was transformative. Not only did my suffering decrease dramatically, but my actual performance improved. By detaching from the outcome, I became more present, creative, and authentic in my presentation. This is the counterintuitive power of strategic detachment. When you stop emotionally grasping for specific results, you often become more likely to achieve them. And even when external outcomes don't match your hopes, your internal experience remains stable and centered. But strategic detachment isn't a one-time intervention. It's a comprehensive psychological practice that must be applied consistently across different domains of life. And it requires specific techniques tailored to different forms of attachment. For attachment to outcomes, the practice of provisional goal setting is essential. This involves pursuing objectives with full commitment while simultaneously holding them lightly in your mind. You work toward goals as if they matter tremendously, but you don't allow your emotional well-being to depend on achieving them. For attachment to identity, self-complexity becomes vital. This means developing multiple sources of meaning and value in your life, so that challenges in one area don't threaten your entire sense of self. When being a successful professional is just one of many important dimensions of who you are, a career setback loses its power to devastate you. For attachment to narratives, flexible thinking is the key practice. This involves actively challenging your rigid expectations about how things should be and developing the capacity to adapt to reality as it actually unfolds, rather than struggling against it. These practices aren't merely theoretical, They're supported by robust research in cognitive psychology and neuroscience. Studies on cognitive flexibility show that individuals who can adapt their thinking to changing circumstances experience significantly less anxiety and depression when facing challenges. Similarly, research on psychological flexibility, a core component of acceptance and commitment therapy, demonstrates that the ability to maintain contact with the present moment and adapt behavior to serve valued ends, even in the presence of difficult thoughts and feelings, strongly predicts mental health and life satisfaction. But implementing these practices requires overcoming significant cultural and psychological barriers. We live in a society that constantly reinforces attachment through social media metrics that quantify our worth, through advertising that links products to identity, and through narratives that equate happiness with specific achievements or acquisitions. This is why strategic detachment isn't just a personal practice. It's a radical act of psychological liberation in a culture designed to keep you attached, reactive, and perpetually dissatisfied. I want to speak directly to you now, because there's a good chance you're resisting some aspect of what I'm sharing. Perhaps you're thinking, this sounds like giving up. If I detach from outcomes, won't I lose my drive to succeed? Or maybe, if I practice acceptance, aren't I just settling for less than I deserve? These objections don't come from logical analysis. They come from fear. And I understand that fear intimately, because I've felt it myself. When I first encountered these concepts, I worried that detachment would make me passive or indifferent. I believed that my anxiety and attachment were necessary motivators, that without them, I would lose my edge. But I was profoundly wrong, and you might be too. Look closely at your own experience. Has your attachment to outcomes actually helped you achieve them? Has your anxiety about others' opinions actually improved your relationships? Has your rigid adherence to how things should be actually made reality conform to your expectations? Or has attachment instead created suffering without providing the control you seek? Think about a recent situation where you were highly attached to a specific outcome, perhaps a job interview, a romantic interaction, or a creative project. Now ask yourself honestly, did your emotional attachment help you perform better? Or did it create tension, self-consciousness, and limitation? The uncomfortable truth is that attachment doesn't enhance performance. It undermines it. When you're attached to outcomes, you become self-conscious rather than task-focused, risk-averse rather than creative, and rigid rather than responsive. This isn't just philosophical speculation. Research in performance psychology consistently shows that outcome-focused attention impairs execution, while process engagement enhances it. This is why elite athletes are trained to focus on the movement itself rather than the score, and why performers who get lost in the process consistently outperform those fixated on audience reactions. But there's a deeper resistance many of us feel, the fear that without attachment, we'll lose passion and meaning. This fear misunderstands both attachment and passion. True passion isn't dependent on specific outcomes. It's an intrinsic engagement with activities that matter to you. When you're genuinely passionate about something, you do it because the activity itself is meaningful, not because of the external validation or results it might bring. Think of children at play. They're fully engaged, completely present, and deeply passionate, yet entirely free from attachment to outcomes. They're not playing to achieve something. They're playing because the activity itself is inherently rewarding. This state, engagement without attachment, is what psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi called flow, the optimal human experience. Flow research shows that our happiest, most productive moments come when we're fully immersed in meaningful activity without self-conscious attachment to results. But there's another, even deeper fear that keeps us attached. The fear that without attachment, we won't be protected from pain. We believe that if we can just care enough, control enough, or prepare enough, we can insulate ourselves from suffering. If we anticipate every possible negative outcome, if we analyze every interaction exhaustively, if we never let our guard down, then perhaps we can avoid being hurt. This is the greatest illusion of all. Attachment doesn't protect you from pain, it guarantees it. When you're attached to specific outcomes, every deviation from your expectations becomes a source of suffering. When you're attached to how others should behave, every independent choice they make has the potential to upset you. When you're attached to rigid identities, every challenge to those identities becomes an existential threat. Strategic detachment doesn't eliminate care or concern. It doesn't make you indifferent to outcomes or disengaged from life. Instead, it allows you to care deeply while remaining psychologically free. Consider your closest relationships. When you're attached to how someone should behave or what they should provide you, the relationship becomes a source of friction and disappointment. But when you can love someone fully while accepting their autonomy and the unpredictability of life, the relationship becomes a source of joy and growth, even amidst inevitable challenges. The same principle applies to your work. When you're attached to external validation or specific achievements, work becomes a source of anxiety and insecurity. But when you can commit fully to meaningful work while detaching from recognition and outcomes, you discover a sustainable passion that doesn't depend on others' reactions. I know this directly from my own experience. For years, I approached my creative work with intense attachment. Each project carried the weight of validating my worth. Each public response determined my emotional state. The result wasn't excellence, it was paralysis, perfectionism, and profound suffering. Learning strategic detachment transformed not just my experience of creating, but the quality of what I created. By focusing on the work itself, rather than its reception, I became more authentic, more innovative, and paradoxically more successful by conventional metrics. But the greatest gift of strategic detachment isn't professional success or even emotional stability. It's the capacity to be fully present for your actual life, rather than constantly battling with reality as it is. When you're attached to how things should be, you're never fully engaged with how they actually are. You're constantly comparing the present moment to your mental model of how it ought to be, and finding reality wanting. This creates a perpetual state of subtle dissatisfaction, a background hum of discontent that colors even positive experiences. Strategic detachment breaks this pattern. It allows you to experience life directly, without the constant mediation of judgments, expectations, and attachments. This doesn't mean accepting harmful situations that can be changed. It means engaging with reality clearly and effectively, rather than through the distorting lens of attachment. I believe you're ready for this freedom. You wouldn't have watched this far if something in you didn't recognize the truth of what I'm sharing. But implementing strategic detachment requires more than intellectual understanding. It demands practical techniques and consistent practice. Let me now share the practical framework for strategic detachment that you can begin implementing immediately. The framework consists of 4 interconnected practices, which I call the card system: clarify, accept, redirect, and detach. First, clarify what you can and cannot control. When facing any challenging situation, take a sheet of paper and draw a line down the middle. On one side, list everything about the situation that falls within your control. On the other, list everything that doesn't. Be ruthlessly honest. You'll likely find that far less is within your control than you initially thought. For example, in a job interview, you control your preparation, presentation, and attitude, but not the interviewer's mood, competing candidates' qualifications, or the company's changing priorities. By clarifying this distinction, you immediately reduce suffering by stopping the futile attempt to control the uncontrollable. Second, accept all possible outcomes. This doesn't mean expecting negative results or abandoning preferences. It means developing the psychological flexibility to be okay regardless of what happens. A powerful technique here is emotional rehearsal, vividly imagining different possible outcomes, including worst-case scenarios, and practicing responding to them with equanimity. When you can genuinely say, "I strongly prefer outcome A, but I can be okay with outcomes B, C, or D as well," you achieve a psychological freedom that's impossible through attachment to specific results. Third, redirect your focus from outcomes to process. Instead of fixating on the results you hope to achieve, immerse yourself in the inherent value of the activity itself. Ask yourself, how can I find meaning in this process, regardless of the outcome? What qualities can I embody right now that are valuable in themselves? For instance, rather than obsessing about whether your creative work will be well received, focus on expressing yourself authentically, developing your craft, or exploring ideas that genuinely interest you. The process becomes its own reward, independent of external validation. Fourth, detach from rigid identities and narratives. Notice when you're telling stories about what things should be like, or who you should be. Observe these as mental constructions rather than objective truths. Practice flexible thinking by asking, is this the only valid perspective? What other ways could I interpret this situation? When you catch yourself thinking, as a successful person, I can't fail at this, recognize the rigid identity at play. Replace it with more flexible self-conceptions. I value achievement, but my worth isn't determined by any single outcome. Together, these four practices, clarify, accept, redirect, and detach, create a comprehensive system for strategic detachment that can be applied to any challenging situation. The beauty of this framework is that it's both immediately applicable and endlessly deepening. You can use the card system right now for whatever is causing you suffering, and you can continue refining your practice throughout your life. What makes strategic detachment so powerful is that it works whether or not others understand or implement it. Unlike strategies that depend on changing other people's behavior, detachment is entirely within your control. When someone criticizes you unfairly, you don't need them to stop criticizing. You need the internal freedom that comes from detachment from their opinions. This is true psychological independence, the capacity to maintain your center regardless of external circumstances. It doesn't mean you never experience difficult emotions. It means those emotions no longer control you or define your experience. Strategic detachment transforms your relationship with everything that causes suffering, from minor daily irritations to major life challenges. It allows you to engage fully with life while remaining free from the psychological bonds that create unnecessary pain. If you've truly understood the power of strategic detachment, comment below with "Freedom comes from within" to let me know you've reached this point. I'm curious to hear which aspect of strategic detachment resonates most strongly with your current life challenges. The path to emotional freedom through strategic detachment isn't a one-time event. It's a lifelong practice of increasing psychological liberation. What I've shared today is just the beginning. The card framework provides the essential foundation, but mastering strategic detachment in specific domains, relationships, work, health challenges, financial concerns, requires deeper exploration and tailored techniques. Think about how your life would transform if you could maintain this psychological freedom consistently. Imagine facing criticism without defensiveness, setbacks without despair, uncertainty without anxiety. Imagine pursuing ambitious goals with full commitment while remaining emotionally stable regardless of outcomes. This isn't just a philosophical ideal. It's a practical possibility that becomes more accessible with consistent practice and the right guidance. Many of us have been taught that attachment equals care, that anxiety equals motivation, and that control equals security. Unlearning these cultural and psychological patterns takes time and support, but the freedom waiting on the other side is worth the journey. I know because I've walked this path myself, from constant emotional reactivity to increasing psychological freedom. It hasn't made me perfect or eliminated all suffering, but it has transformed my relationship with difficult experiences in ways I once couldn't have imagined. If today's message resonated deeply, subscribe right now, because in the coming weeks, I'll be exploring specific applications of strategic detachment for relationships, professional challenges, and internal struggles like anxiety and rumination. The journey we've begun today continues with practical techniques for implementing these principles in the areas where you need them most. I see strategic detachment not just as a personal practice, but as a radical response to a culture designed to keep us reactive, attached, and perpetually dissatisfied. Together, we're exploring a different way of being, one characterized by psychological freedom, meaningful engagement, and the capacity to care deeply without becoming enslaved by that care. I'll see you soon for the next step in this journey toward emotional freedom.